Hello everyone, welcome back to the URBOND podcast. Today we have a special episode and we'll talk about mental health. Obviously it's Christmas and with the cost of living crisis it's a very prevalent issue right now. So we have Abdul, Ollie and Sandie with us today, so I'm just going to hand over to them to introduce themselves.
Okay. Hi, I'm Abdul Rosewell. I'm a relationship and life coach. I'm a passionate advocate of promoting mental health awareness. I live in the Brookside area, and when I heard about URBOND talking about this subject, I was really passionate to get involved with yourselves.
Amazing.
Hi, I'm Ollie Dale and I work with Power Media, and I've had many different experiences with mental health in the past, and I feel really privileged to be able to be a part of this episode today. So thank you very much for having me.
Hi, I'm Sandie Walker. I'm one of the founder directors of the Good Mental Health Cooperative, and I live and breathe mental health and have done since I was 18 years old when I started training to be a mental health nurse. And since then I've been on all sides of the coin, if you like. I've been a nurse looking after people, I've been a person who's been mentally unwell under services, I've been an academic, which is what I do as well now, researching mental health, and I'm a therapist and so on. So yeah, I've got a bit of a 360 view, I suppose you might say.
An amazing wealth of experience.
Mm-hmm. And I'm old, so I've been alive all the time.
Wisdom.
What made you get into it in the first place?
Good question. I think actually I got into it in the first place partly by accident, but because I thought subconsciously that if I didn't, I probably would have been a patient, because I had quite a difficult time when I was young, and that left me with some issues to deal with for various reasons.
Okay.
So I kind of accidentally fell into mental health work, and I love people.
Oh.
And I'm really, really nosy, and I like to know what makes people tick. And part of that was obviously a personal journey as well, trying to work out what made me tick. But yeah, the two go alongside very well together. So I think that's basically why.
Well, thank you for coming on today and sharing that. Guys as well, why is it so important to you, and what made you feel like you had to share your experience today? Abdul?
So for myself, around 2003, I suffered work-related stress and anxiety, which led to a bout of depression. At the time, I didn't realise what was going on. All I knew was my behaviour started to change. I was more irritable. I was having problems at home. I was just struggling, but hiding it at the same time. Albeit someone who knew was close to me would observe that change. I wasn't in acceptance of that, and equally at the same time, when you're physically, you've hurt yourself, you might go to a doctor, or you've cut yourself and you might say, I'm bleeding. But when it's something around what you're thinking or how you feel, and it's emotional, there's I think habitually or culturally or the way you've grown up, there's an element that says to you, no, I'll brush it off and I'll carry on. And for me, that just took me down a very downward spiral. Eventually I did go and get help, and I went to my GP. They straight away diagnosed me with suffering from depression. I then went into a world of just hiding, because of the stigma associated with mental health. And when someone says you're depressed or you're anxious or you're stressed, I interpret that as a form of weakness.
Right.
A form of weakness that I didn't want anybody to know. I didn't want my ex-wife to know. I didn't want the children who I was providing for to know. I didn't want my in-laws to know. I certainly didn't want my work colleagues to know, because otherwise I'm in charge of a role that's got a responsibility. And then how would that help me in my future career progression. You get out of it, I guess, you have to go through that journey, and you learn a lot about yourself through that journey, and you have to acknowledge that you're suffering, and then look at what support's out there and somehow come out of that. There's a bit of a journey, but I guess that's why I was passionate about it. So actually, I've suffered from mental health at a time where mental health probably isn't what it is today in terms of its awareness, but there's still an awful lot we can do. Equally, I have children and a lot of the young people who are suffering or have suffered through mental health, especially through the pandemic and the ramifications of shielding and everything that's come with COVID. So I think for me, it's a very passionate subject that impacts us on a daily basis, and every community is impacted by it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Ollie, do you want to share your experience as well?
Yeah, so from a young age, kind of around my teenage years, I had a lot of like family issues going on, and during secondary school, it wasn't really something that I ever really wanted to speak to like my classmates about or my teachers. And I feel like it kind of like put me in this kind of like dark space where I didn't feel like I could actually speak to anyone about it. And so it wasn't until I spoke to one of my head tutors until he had a proper sit down conversation with me and said it's okay to like speak up about these issues, because like obviously all my friends would be like, oh, it's fine, don't worry about it, like it'll get better soon, and like it's something that you can't really put into words sometimes. And I fully agree with you about kind of the kind of stigma about it. There's especially because at that time it wasn't as more widely kind of like known and understood. So I feel like it's very important to like, especially for young people in secondary school and even college people as well, that they need to get the help that, if they're struggling, they need to speak up about it, because it's the first step is to just acknowledge that it's there, and then the second step is to actually seek help and advice from them.
Yeah. Sandie, I was going to ask you as well, it must be interesting to be on sort of the other side of it, where people come to you and tell them about their mental health experience. How's that?
Well, I see it as a privilege, to be honest, that people come to me, because I've been a nurse first, and I've often worked in A&E where people have tried to seriously harm themselves for whatever reason. And then as a therapist, when people come to you and they tell you the tales of their lives and how they've ended up in distress, I find it, it's quite a privilege actually. That's the way I look at it. That people are willing to share. I think I was really lucky, and maybe a little bit dim as well, that when I was younger and I had these struggles, and then I became unwell. I had postnatal depression after the birth of my first son.
Right.
And I lost my job as a mental health nurse because of it, which I thought was a bit ironic, but I was too unwell at the time to really do anything about that. So eventually I did obviously get back to work and so on. And that's given me a real fire in my belly, actually, wanting to the voices of those who are really not heard or are, like you just said, Abdul, kind of seen as being less than somehow because they've got mentally distressed over what are so often really sensible, awful things. Not sensible, but their reaction is sensible to really awful circumstances often. Severe stress, trauma, and so on. There's always a good reason for why somebody becomes distressed, and their mental health is affected. So what am I trying to say? So I think, I've always been accepting and just see people where they are, and at the Good Mental Health Cooperative we're very clear on that. Yeah. You come to us and we accept you as you are now, and that's it, it's acceptance.
Yeah. Abdul, as well, I know you mentioned you're in a corporate environment most of the time in your job, so how is that with your mental health? How is it different to in your personal life?
So I guess in any role that you do in a corporate role, your own business, etc., there's always pressures because you want to perform, you want to provide, and I guess you want to whatever your interpretation of being successful or what growth looks like or whatever your aspirations are. Certain industry sectors, there's an awful lot of responsibility, accountability, and pressure on you. So understanding what makes you tick, understanding your capability is quite hard, because you often don't want to let your peers down. So you tend to say, I think in the past I would class myself as a bit of a people pleaser.
Right.
So I would probably say, yeah, bring it on. And then, yeah, okay, bring that on. And I would stack up things for myself, or maybe not doing myself any favours. So I was saying yes to something which meant saying no to something else. That might be a bit of quiet time for me. That might mean a bit of reflection time. That might mean doing a training course. So I found that very hard in terms of to judge that balance, and that takes a lot of skill, especially if you are a people pleaser. It's a massive shift in the way you behave, and it just feels very wrong to you as an individual. I think for me that's taken time, and that's taken, to say no is very difficult, and you feel awful when you're in the past. No, sorry, but it's been assertive at the same time. So it's understanding, taking those measures, and yes, you need training, yes, you need support, you need to, going back to what Ollie was saying, it's really hard to do, it's noticing, because once you're in it, it's hard to notice. Once you look at it and reflect of it from the other side, then you know, actually, that's right, or that feels right, and that feels wrong, and actually I'm going to change and I'm going to try something different. It's been having that awareness and having that ability to just recognise that in itself. I think from a corporate environment, from where I was talking, when I became mentally, when I had my mental health episode in my life, it was a different place then. But since then, a lot of organisations, I'm glad to say, have invested in mental health awareness. They've started to realise that the impact on, I guess, their bottom line, their shareholders, having a productive, happy organisation, are more productive. So there are, in the company that I work for in my day job, definitely there's a massive awareness. We've developed mental health aiders. There's lots of, we've taken businesses out, old businesses out over time, and for the whole population where we're educating them. We've done sort of mandatory training courses that are sent through corporate learning, etc. So we're on this journey. A lot still to do, but to where I was before, to where I am now, that's really good. And I think for the next generation, I think we'll just grow. It's a bit like when I think about when I was younger around racism as an example, to a different topic. The education wasn't there.
Yeah.
So therefore, what felt okay back then, or you had to put up with back then, you don't see that in here and now. And so my children probably don't suffer the same stigma or issues that I did. So it's progression. Definitely it's progressed. And the mental health agenda does need to continue exploring and getting out into the communities, out into schools, etc.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Sandie, from your experience, would you say the same thing?
I would. I'd share a note of caution in that quite a lot of the training that's done out there at the moment is still very much, we've set up our mental health system in a way that's quite disableist, if that's the right word. It probably isn't, but we focus on the deficit kind of base. It's what people can't do. People aren't quite seen as being whole
Right.
somehow, and so we have these labels of different diagnoses, which, whilst they can be useful in some ways to kind of group behaviours together, they can also be really stigmatising. So we have to be really careful, I think, in how we do it. And from my perspective, I think it's healthier to speak about mental health problems coming about as a result of social factors, health factors, you know, because we are whole beings. We quite often become physically unwell, which then leads to us being mentally unwell, or we might have a period where we feel low because something's happened, but then we also become physically unwell. You know, we are whole beings, and the two things influence each other. So I think we have to be really careful with youngsters. There is a tendency at the moment for youngsters to self-diagnose, because there's so much information out there about these labels, and I think that's a worrying area. And there's research being done around it, but so I think, yes, absolutely, education needs to happen around how to keep yourself mentally healthy as well as physically healthy. But if we can keep away from those labels, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, Ollie, what's your opinion on that?
I would have to agree with you on that. I think there is that fine line between understanding that you actually have a mental health issue or something along that line, or if it's a difficult time and you need assistance in that, because there is a fine line between them, but it also there is that blurred line, because I don't know, I think for me, for a while, I kind of neglected it and thought it wasn't anything bad, but then as you were talking about the kind of mental and physical, it started affecting my physical health as well. And I can speak for a lot of my friends who are in the same position as well, and it's one of those things that, like, for me in that time, I remember having a very cloudy head, and it was also because, like, all of those thoughts of, like, overthinking and, like, thinking about all of those situations that were happening, I ended up kind of, like, getting caught up in a web of what I've created in my head. And then after actually speaking up about it, it was like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, and I was like, wow. Like, and after chatting with my friends and, like, close relatives, it's just something that, like, when they vent to me or to someone, then that weight is lifted off their shoulders instantly. And I think it's really important for just any person, whether that be a young person or old person, they need someone to speak to, whether that be a family member, a friend, or a professional mental health advisor. So,
I think, I'm not sure if any of your mental health struggles actually came from a place, like a reason that it triggered it. But I've noticed that from myself and my friends, sometimes it just happens. Like, sometimes there's no trigger, and sometimes you do just feel low. And I think sometimes when people are trying to seek help, the person's always, like, trying to find the problem to fix.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually.
So I don't know if you feel the same.
Yeah. I think my experience, I've noticed that this is some of the learning I've been doing. Sometimes you feel something and you don't quite recognise them. Why does me seeing that playground or that thing trigger an emotion in me? I can't. No one's spoken to me, but there's a feeling that that's quite strong inside me. One of the things that I've been learning just through my journey is there's always something that really tends to go back to my childhood, and it's that timeline to go. So why do I feel like that? Why seeing that tree, for example, makes me feel either sad or happy or just uncomfortable. And for me, it's taking the time to go back to that timeline, and then I go, well, okay, that I can go back 10 years, and okay, that makes a bit of sense, and I might go back a bit further. And sometimes then you get to the point where you go, aha, now I've started to realise why seeing that tree makes me feel the way I feel. And really breaking it down and unpacking it is a bit of a skill, because you have to ask yourself, and you've got to sit with it, and you've got to notice it, and I write it down. And there's a really good scenario very recently. I felt this particular way, and I remember going into my mother's house, and I felt ashamed about sharing this story, but I will share it because it's a very powerful story. I walked in there, and she was praying. I'm not particularly religious, etc. But something triggered me in me walking into that room. She was praying, and I think I made a quick remark. she finished her prayers and she came out, and she was quite offended by that, my behaviour, my demeanour, etc. And I really overreacted to her. And I walked out and I left and I huffed and I was angry. And I guess going back to the point was what I was trying to understand was, why did I overreact? Why did I, to my mother, my beloved mother that I adore, that's done nothing, that's just expressed her disappointment. Why have I overreacted? And I think what I did was I unpacked it. And I unpacked it to the point where I realised, wow, I've let go of like 20, 30 years of anger in this one moment. In that, between then and then, I'd never said anything. And what it related to was, I never had an arranged marriage, which was what my family wanted me to do. So as a result of that, not having an arranged marriage, they disowned me. So as part of that disownment and abandonment, you can imagine what was going through my mental health, and I was alone. And all the people that I grew up with, that I hung around with, I felt that, whether that was me or whether that's what happened, they felt like they turned away from me and I was on my own. And I guess going back to, there were certain things that would remind me of that, certain triggers. I guess to your point, it's not immediate, obvious, what makes you feel the way you feel. Yeah. And it's just having that courage to sit with it and notice and map it out. And the positive behind the stories, I went back to her for the following 48 hours and I went through the story with her. And I explained to her, this is my reaction, I'm really sorry. And but that emotion that I've buried isn't there, and I feel different about the situation, about my abandonment or religion or culture, etc. Like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. And I know you went through a divorce as well, so would you like to share your experience on that and how, so your wider family? So
divorces or separation or breakup in any situation where you've been together for a while and you've got children from that relationship, it's really hard because obviously you feel stressed, you feel anxiety. There's support out there, but depending on the type of person you are, I'm quite I think naturally I like to just sort of hide and observe and reflect and I think for me it all goes about being vulnerable. So you have to be vulnerable and you have to take accountability. And once you start, expressing your role in why the marriage broke up, because it's easy to go, no, that was that person and that was that person, but to say actually no. So it's taking about accountability. Yes, it's a horrible, horrible thing that happens, and I've got children. And so therefore, as soon as you've made that decision that you're separating, you're breaking up, other lives are impacted and there your extended family are impacted. And it's been a very, what I'd call an up and down journey in terms of there's moments of relief and there's moments of real frustration and there has been moments of real anger from me. I think the way that I've learned to cope with it is I've been studying this thing called NLP, which was neuro-linguistic programming, which is about reframing your thinking and saying, well, okay, that happened to me, that's how that made me feel, but actually, where's the positive in this? How can I reframe this so I feel better about what's happened? I can look at it with the lens of a new opportunity, a new chapter, and I can look at something that's been said about me or my behaviour with compassion and understanding, as opposed to, and the innocence of what that person said, because they've looked at it, that's their story, that's their narrative. Yeah. Doesn't mean that I'm right and they're wrong, or they're right and I'm wrong. It's just having that perspective. And that's hugely helped me to sleep at night, with my confidence, and to be able to look people in the eye and say, actually, it's really difficult. I'm not alone. In this day and age, a lot of people are going through it, especially with the pandemic. Put a lens on anyone in a relation, in a marriage, etc. Just magnified it. And I think having the courage to say, actually, this isn't working, is very difficult, but courageous at the same time.
Yeah. It's really encouraging to hear you talk so openly about your experience, actually. I have to say thank you to you both and Sandie as well for coming on today. I know it's still an issue with men's mental health, it's still not spoken about enough, but it's nice to see it's definitely getting better, it's improving. But do you still think there's a lot more that needs to be done around mental health and men's mental health? Sandie?
There's so much still needs doing around mental health. Yeah, absolutely. It's still very much the poor relative in terms of healthcare provision. There's not enough resources out there.
Right.
There's an awful lot of difficulties. Society that we live in is maddening. It's really so focused on material things, and we know that actually research shows us really clearly, and everyone's experience probably will resonate with it, that if we go outside into the woods and walk in the woods, which isn't actually expensive, we're going to feel better for that than going to the shopping mall and buying things. And we don't have debts at the end of it. We've kind of got things a bit skew with at the moment, so there's still a long way to go and lots of education to do. Taking charge of your life and becoming an actor in your life rather than reacting to things is a really good lesson. That's what I heard from your story just now.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
I think that's awesome, and that's a really important thing. It's very difficult sometimes to take responsibility for ourselves when we've done something that we don't feel quite, proud of ourselves for.
Yeah.
So that's important, but it isn't all about the individual. It's about the community, actually, and how can we work to get together to make the community more robust. So we support each other, because connections between people are so essential for good mental health. And we know that from the pandemic, don't we, where we all had to stay indoors all the time. It was really difficult for many people, not for everyone. Some people really did thrive because we were all different at the end of the day. But there's so much, still a long way to go.
And what would you say around men's mental health in particular?
Men's mental health? I think that's a good question. And obviously it depends on the individual men. But I think the issues around stigma and paying attention to yourself and moving away from the idea that you have to be the strong one, you have to be the provider, those kind of social roles that we've fitted around men are actually very restrictive,
right,
and quite toxic sometimes.
Absolutely.
And I think if we can move away from that and allow the day when men can just greet each other and hug each other on the street and say, "I love you, man, I love you, brother," same as everybody else. Like women do, then the world will be
that's a nice point, actually. Ollie, what would you say you'd like to see in the future?
I'd like to see the exact same thing you were just talking about, because I think also to relate back to the lockdown and everything, the pandemic, I think there were a few moments where some of my male friends were also going through very similar situations to me. And there was one standout moment for me that happened during lockdown, and it was my friend Sam. And it was at a time where I felt the most alone that I think I've ever felt. And it was because I was stuck in my room for so many just days on end, as everyone else was. And he came down and drove to my house, and we had a conversation in the car. And I told him how I was feeling, and we both cried. And it felt nice to actually, let out that emotion and not feel like I can't express that emotion to my friends. And he told me something that I still remember to this day, and it is that it might sound cheesy, but it's just to maximise your stoke every day. Just make sure you're doing at least one or two things that make you happy every single day, whether that be simple stuff as like going for a walk in the woods, or going to do an activity, or meeting up with friends and family. Whatever works for you, just make sure you do at least one thing every day that maximises your stoke. and obviously, for me, I really internalised that at that moment, and still to this day I always message him going, hopefully maximising your story. It's always a back and forth between us about it, but every time we have a chat, it's always a lot of love there. And it's the same with all my other male friends. I feel like it's not something that we think about too much. It's like we have these conversations because they need to be had. It's not something that like we bottle it up anymore, because over time we've realised that like that's just always going to end in the same result. So yeah, just anyone that is listening to this right now, just if you have someone like a friend or a family member, just reach out to them and just even have a chat, just offload and listen to them and hear what they've been going through too, and then you can both, offload together.
Yeah. What would your advice be?
I think it's a really good point, Ollie, mate, because I was talking earlier to somebody and said, I guess my group of friends are slightly older than Ollie, and they struggle. They really struggle as a man to say, I love you, and give us a hug, but on a one-to-one, they open themselves up, they talk to me, and they tell me how they feel, how they've struggled, but hey, am I going to talk about it publicly? Do I want to? It's hard, it's a journey, but we need to really just change that narrative to say, I can cry. Hey, it's a natural emotion. It's a really good healing emotion. If you feel it, let it out, and you'll feel better. We are definitely have a lot more work to do in that space. And I think it's us talking about it to say, actually, the more we talk about it, the more we normalise it. I think earlier we were saying about there's a stigma. The stigma is attached, and I think by whether it's physical or mental health, physical health has got less of a stigma associated depending on what your diagnosis is. And I think we just need to normalise that, and that's why I talk about education being a very powerful thing. But to your point, it's about how people interpret that label. It's how we soften that and normalise it.
Yeah, and Sandie, to sort of round up the conversation, what would your advice be to anyone suffering at this moment in time?
Reach out. We've heard that already, haven't we? In this, but like I appreciate that can be really hard to do when you're really feeling awful. If you can there are so many little tips that you could try. Like if you text yourself with whatever it is that's worrying you, and then answer as if you're answering a friend, that might help. Those kind of really simple tips that you can do. Imagine you're talking to someone else, or how would you respond to someone else feeling the way you are?
Yeah.
And turn some of that love that we all have towards yourself, and then once you've done that, maybe then you can find the strength to reach out to someone else. But yeah, there are always things that we can do that will generally make us feel better. And it can just be as simple as changing the way you are. When we're fed up, we tend to go like that and we slump down. Mm-hmm. So if you change your position, you stand up, you move around, do a bit of, put a song on that you love and dance. Go outside, walk around, say hello to someone you've never met before, There's lots of things, and there's loads of resources online that you can go to find tips for different things.
Yeah.
Like that. But you really aren't alone, Life is a rich tapestry and all the emotions are part of that tapestry, whether they're positive or negative. And we should welcome the negative ones in a way because they're giving us clues about stuff we need to change.
Yeah.
And then I was like hanging out with this different group who were rubbing off on me, who wanted to be in education, who wanted to have a different life. So the appeal of going out and doing silly things became less appealing. And I think they're the stories that says actually you may come from a tough department, you may not be getting the support from your parents, you may not have the luxuries in life, the materialistic things in life. But going back to your point, Sandie, a lot of that time no one really, it doesn't really matter what your material position is in life. It's about being happy. And to remember and finding your happy. How do you find that happiness? How do you find that peace?
Contentment happiness is a bit of a trap in itself, because being happy all the time is not real. Nobody's happy all the time. finding peace and contentment is really more what
and we don't do enough of that in terms of actually. So before, and especially when I look at my children, my daughter, she wants a phone. I want a phone, Dad. I want a phone. Why do you need a phone? To do what? Who are you going to ring? You're right. Well, it's like TikTok, it's this, it's that. But can you imagine the pressure? The pressure on these, and then she's walking into the beauty outlet, and I go, I'm going some lip gloss, Dad. I'm like, all of those things, and it's like, oh my Lord. But I guess the pressure is different to what it was then. Different pressures, different society pressures.
Yeah.
And it's just how do we...
Age of social media.
Yeah, very, very difficult.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of very influential people online that can contribute to that as well. It's a difficult game because it's plastered all over social media. Like even for me, like when I'm looking at Instagram and stuff, and like we were talking about this earlier, but like Andrew Tate and stuff, like it's just plastered. Like you just go like that, and it's like, oh, there's another one. But like, I mean, yeah, it's just, I don't know. I feel like people need to have like a spot to find like, actual relevant and important information about mental health. And I feel like, I don't know, that we could probably sort something out with URBOND to do with that. And especially even doing this podcast is kind of like shining the light on it. And like, it's especially us having like conversations, all of us together, like showing off that we can actually have like proper adult conversations about it instead of it being like, oh yeah, we're just going to do this, that and this. Like, we're actually talking about it, and I think people seeing that will change their perspective.
And I think it's good to have different views on it, and different lens on it, and different experiences on it, because that's what it harmonises it. That's your experience, that's your view, that's your opinion. I have a different opinion. Doesn't mean that's right, that's wrong. And I think the thing that I wish I'd mentioned earlier was about, you mentioned men, but people from a minority ethnic background, Bangladeshi men, people, Indian, maybe from your background, drama, really do struggle to talk about emotion, really do struggle about, because as a culture, from my experience, it's just a very, very taboo subject. It's like, you're not a man.
You're not even seen as a person though if you admit to having mental health problems.
Exactly.
In some of the cultures that I've worked with, like the Somali community in Bristol, I've done a load of work with them.
But everyone does. We all suffer. We're all the same. We're human beings. Yeah, it's how do we, and I think that's why by talking about it and normalising it and saying, look, that's the struggle I had. That resonates with me. I understand your plight. I understand where you're coming from. But it doesn't have to be this way. You can change it. Yeah. You do not have to go with the narrative of you're going to get an arranged marriage. Yeah. And why? Because my community and my religious values that's not me. That's not what I can. But the amount of people I know that's gone with that to satisfy their parents and live this lie of a life, and then at some point exploded and gone, it's enough. So we all have to take responsibility in our behaviours and what we accept and what we stand up to.
It shouldn't have to reach a breaking point.
Absolutely, Ollie. You've just said that's the key point. But it's how do we? Yeah. It's about that conversation, constant challenge, constant opportunity to say, actually, I'm going to bring you, and you've got this view, and it might be, it's probably been indoctrinated to you over time through, your background, but is that the real you, or is that the one that you've created from other influences?
Definitely.
I heard a question. What would your advice be to people out there suffering from mental health?
If you're struggling, then there are multiple different ways of dealing with that, obviously. And we talked about the talking and like actually speaking up about it, but going to do like extracurricular activities and stuff if you're like a younger person and there's things in your area that are available to you. I know something that helped me a lot was gymnastics, and it's helped a lot of my friends as well too. So if you're looking for an outlet or something to do out of the house that gets you out of whatever headspace you're in, then I highly recommend you joining a club or going out and just playing football with your mates or going out and just doing stuff and just, as we said, walking, just get out of the house. Because for me, I think lockdown, especially for everyone too, was that like we were so enclosed and like staying in the same place, and especially if you're in the same room for multiple days in a row, you're just like, you can't really tell days apart or hours.
No.
So my advice is just get out of the house and just go.
Just go.
Yeah.
Abdul, do you have any particular advice you'd like to give?
I think my advice would be to very much, there's two aspects of it. One is to notice what's going on with you.
Right.
Don't just think of it as if I cut myself and my leg's bleeding, I'm going to take action. I want to go and get a plaster, or I'm going to go and put an antiseptic, or I'm going to go and do research on vitamin cream, or go to the doctor, or go to the A&E. So from a mental health perspective, if you know there's a change or you can feel that something's not quite right, then please just have the courage to go and talk about it. Now, either to a friend, or go to your GP, or go to a lot of corporate organisations have a hotline that you can ring and talk about anything to, and then equally look at various charities, for good mental health, or anyone that can help you to talk about it. Just talk to somebody. Once you talk to somebody, you'll find some different resources and different ways to maybe help you, to take you to a different journey, to a different path. Just talk. That's all I want to say.
Thank you.
It'd be nice to touch base on that. So how people can find you guys?
The Good Mental Health Co-op. We have several initiatives going at the moment. So we've got Nexus groups, we have a women's group, which includes anyone who identifies as a woman, and we have a men's group, same. And they run every week at the moment. All of our projects are kind of community focused and are free to access as a rule. And obviously we're very dependent on funding, so some things run for some time and then they don't. We have lots of online resources that can be looked at, some and bought for very small cost, some of them, which is kind of education around mental health. We also have a chit-chat drop-in thing on a Monday. We're based at Buckland United Reformed Church, and we can always be contacted by email or Facebook with questions around what might help, because we have a phenomenal amount of knowledge really around what's available in the local community around mental health and well-being, and different sorts of therapies that might be helpful for people who want to go down that road and can't afford the time to wait and can afford to invest in that. That's not everyone, I get that, but there's all sorts we can offer in that regard, so we will always answer questions. We might not be able to provide what's needed, but we will signpost and give you information around it.
Yeah, well, that's a really nice point to finish on. So thank you guys for coming on today. It's really important to talk about, so yeah, definitely needs improvement, but it's good we're taking steps to do that. So thank you for coming on, and everyone that's watching, sending you hugs at this time of year. And thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe to the video, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheers, everybody. I loved it.
It was a great chat. I'm really
it was
glad
good.
that I was a part of it with you guys. It's lovely to meet you too as well.
Thank you.
I'm glad I got to hear about your guys' perspectives on everything as well, because I don't know, I feel like I haven't really had a conversation like this with anyone in a long time, so thank you guys for coming.
I can even see like Ollie's been lifted a bit.
Yeah, I feel
look at that.
like
I can't see my face, but I know there's a glow about it. It's like, yes.